Welcome to this session on dream interpretation with Lisa Sarimi. My name is Elise Ekman, and I am on the Access Elite team that has brought this event to you today. For those of you who've been with us before, welcome back. And for those of you who might not be familiar, Access Elite is a health and wellness company that provides on-demand wellness content and facilitates live virtual events such as these that you can tune into every day, as well as much more. We are so glad that we can facilitate this event and bring a little bit of positivity and connection to your day. So I just want to take a moment and thank each of you for being here. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce our guest today. We have Lisa Sarimi, who is a marriage and family therapist, yoga therapist, and transformation coach. Lisa?
Thank you so much, Elise. So excited to be talking about Dreamwork with everyone. And if you're just joining, we last week did an introduction to Dreamwork, and now we're diving into like the different steps for dream interpretation. The book that we are, I don't know if okay. It's called Inner Work by Robert Johnson. So I highly recommend this book. If you're interested in your own dream interpretation and want a nice tool, and this is also what we're following as we do these presentations. So he says, once we become sensitive to dreams, we discover that every dynamic in a dream is manifesting itself in some way in our practical lives. So maybe after our presentation today, that'll make a little more sense to you. Oh, there's the book. I didn't even have to show it to you that way. So we're going to cover some things today. Actually, a lot of really great content on, a dream journal, making associations, how images and symbols work with dreams, archetypal amplification. What does that mean in relationship to dreams? Personal association, colloquialisms, metaphor, and then the It Clicks method. And this is all really about taking that first step for dream interpretation. So the very first thing I recommend is having some sort of a dream journal, whatever that looks like for you. This allows us a place to kind of record. As I mentioned last time, I think also, really, we have about 6 to 10 seconds from the time when we wake up to have the best memories of a dream. And as we get into a little more of how we begin this dive into dream interpretation, we'll see that remembering the different images that come through in our dreams can be really powerful and informative. So we want to begin to keep track of those images, keep track of narratives, patterns, emotions that start to reveal themselves in our dreams. We want to wake up and document this, and we want to write it down in the present tense. So if something is happening in your dream, you want to state it as though it's happening right then and there. That's just another way that's going to help us be better at being able to recall the dream itself. And then, of course, we really want to highlight those most charged pieces because they do ignite something inside of us. And those are the parts of our unconscious. We talked about last week how dreams are really a platform for the unconscious content that we repress to get revealed and worked with. So you might right now, even as we're moving through this content today, think about if there is a dream that you want to work with. Maybe it's a dream, a recurring dream you've had in your life. Maybe it's the dream you had last night. The other thing is, not everybody, I know people that their dreams are so complex and they remember everything. And then I know other people that can't remember their dreams, right? So if you're listening to this and you're one of those people that's like, man, I really want to work with my dreams, I just can't remember my dreams, then what you want to do is you want to start to do a ritualizing, asking the unconscious to help you remember your dreams. Maybe placing something like a little token underneath your pillow before you go to bed. Saying a prayer, or like I said, a request to the unconscious to start to cultivate and call forward remembering your dreams. being prepared with a journal or your phone or something. So right away, you can capture the content of your dream. And then over time, through our dream journals and the remembering of our dreams, really starting to identify the patterns. So we're going to get into symbols and we're going to get into images. And what we're going to find is that sometimes we'll have all kinds of crazy images and symbolism show up in the dream. But there's a pattern. And that pattern sometimes is really similar to what we're experiencing in our waking life. So how do we start this dismantling or this interpretation of dreams? First, we want to work with really making associations. And so I was working with a client who had a dream. She had a dream about, it was actually a snippet of the dream. She didn't remember the whole dream, but there was a snippet where she was in her room, and her room is at her mother's house. And there were these rats. They were really big and vivid, and the vents were really big in her dream. And they were just trying to like get her through these vents. And she had told her mom, her mom had told her, if you throw a rock at the wall, be careful because it's going to awaken the rats. So anyway, long story short, we worked with this dream and we had her do some association. And so the images that felt really like strong to her were the rats themselves, the fact that it was in her mother's home, the location that we're at sometimes in our dream can be be very symbolic of a lot of different things. And the fact that these rats were in the walls of her mother's house, not, outside of the walls. There was something significant about that. So as I mentioned earlier, if you're working with maybe the dream you had last night or pattern dreams or repetitive, right? Sometimes we have those repetitive dreams. We can work with the images. And as we begin the word association, we're able to kind of see the messages that are deeper. So what I want you to really take in today is like the importance of working with association when it comes to dream interpretation, and also how you might do a lot of work exploring different types of associations, but it doesn't always mean that every association is going to end up into your interpretation, but it's a part of your process. So it can be challenging. It takes some things to do dream work, which we'll talk about. But I just want to encourage you to stay committed to the original image, right? Because easily, like for example, if we were looking at the rat word association, easily, for example, we could go from rats to jealousy, and then jealousy, could go into like a different relationship that wasn't showing up in the dream, right? So we want to try to keep the associations still associated with the original image, and the feelings that each one of these images might evoke. So this is one way to do it, with the circles, just doing the bubbles and allowing those bubbles to give you space to just continue to kind of uncover all the different associations, and they're personal. So the other thing, if you're doing dream work through the lens of the way that we're going to be doing it in this series, everything is really a representation of our own inner personalities. So although you might be able to go online and start to Google certain images and see what the different symbols are out there, first, before you go do that, start with what's just resonating in your own heart and what's there in yourself, because then you're coming from your raw unconscious content rather than it be something else being projected onto those images. So we're still kind of under the umbrella of associations for the whole webinar today. But I want to bring in some concepts like the images and the symbols. So images are really the language of our psyche. An image says more than 1,000 words, right? We can look at an image and we can learn so much about what's trying to be communicated through the symbolism. It's the symbolism of the images that give us access to that meaning. And we're going to see that symbolism, some of it is personal and some of it is what's out in the collective. And so when we're doing our own dream work, it's interpreting, what are the deeper meanings of some of the images and the symbols for us personally, and where is some of that being informed by what might be in the collective. So the other thing just to say about that is that symbolism, it's so personal, right? So when we're connecting to how things are unfolding and being symbolized, we're really connecting to our inner self, which is one of the reasons why I think Robert Johnson named this book Inner Work, which we'll also be speaking to as well. Like, what is inner work? Inner work to me, and a lot of people that work in depthology, is really about being able to use images that appear in our lives and then uncover the symbolism of those images and what is trying to be communicated, right? So you can look at some of the images that are here, and one of the things that we could probably all agree on if we're able to remember our dreams is how awkwardly unrealistic they can be, or how they might not make sense. For example, the image of in his business suit with an umbrella on a couch in the ocean, right? There's all of this kind of like chaos and stuff that doesn't make sense. So working with the images and working with symbolism, we're able to bring a little more of a narrative that personalizes what's happening in our inner worlds, and that's being wanting to be revealed through our dreams. So that brings us into a couple other ways when we're doing associations that we can work with association. One is archetypal amplification. So what is an archetype? Let's start there for those of you that's more of a new concept. An archetype is really just a universal behavioral pattern that exists. And a lot of times imagery is used to demonstrate it. Each archetype, however, will express itself within its own characteristic of symbolism. So thinking about, we all have the archetype of the critic. Maybe some of us are closer to the critic than others. Maybe some of us aren't even aware of that. And what I mean when I say the critic is that aspect, that inner voice that is always giving us a hard time, that is putting us down, that is always telling us everything that we are doing wrong, or someone else, or a situation, right? So that archetype is not just not generous to us personally, but also the harder we are on us, chances are the harder we are on those around us. And that archetypal pattern of the critic is what's kind of ruling that. Now, they express themselves with their own symbolism. So for each one of us, if we were going to do work with the critic, which I do with a lot of our clients, my clients don't have the same critic, right? When we start to do that work, it's very unique and very personal to them and their experiences. So when we're working with the associations, we really want to also allow that space for archetypes to arise, and then to really discern where is it an individual like connection, or where is it something that's maybe more in the collective that's been given to us just as archetypal information. And how we can work with the archetypes also for that association is something called archetypal amplification. Don't worry about all these big words if they're feeling big to you. I mean, all that really is let us use myth, fairy tale, and ancient religious traditions to inform us. Those are where the stories are. The archetypes are found in the stories that live in the collective. So we can use the fairy tales that Disney talks about, and all of the stories that we've grown up with. Some of those might have to do with our individual cultures. Some of them just have to, they're all individual actually on our experiences, or something that we've found interest in to do research on and get more information on. So when it appears, it says, and what I'm talking about when I say it is the archetypal pattern, it says that there's something going on between the ego and that archetype, and something is trying to evolve. So being able to like expand our awareness to the movement of these energies within us and through dream really, it really gives us another dimension for our evolution as human beings. The other way that dreams work is they pick up on colloquialisms and metaphors, right? So it's not always literal. So although, back to the client I had that had the rats in the walls dream, she did mention that her mom had found mice in the house and that they had had Terminex come out recently and so forth and so on. That's actually where she started. She thought maybe that because of those unfolding of events, that's why she was having dreams of these rats. Yet it's through colloquialisms and metaphors that we're able to discern those deeper elements of what's really going on. As she unfolded that dream, what she was able to see was what the rats were representing were this feeling of betrayal and jealousy that was happening within the inner walls of her own family. And the rats also represented survival, and she was feeling very challenged around her own ability to survive and just do those basic things. So as you can see, being able to connect to those images in these different ways and create those associations can really expand. And we're going to get into, well, how do we know what it really means in the end? Expand our ability to evolve and our perception to see what's there. So if you're not familiar with colloquialisms, some examples would be like buzz off, yonder, gimme, what's up. It's kind of like slang. It's not a formal or literary type of expression. It's usually used more in ordinary or familiar conversation. So when we're working with images from dreams and association, we want to keep our eyes and our hearts open for these things also showing up. And then metaphors, excuse me, are things like you ain't nothing but a hound dog crying all the time. I did a thesis and I used the metaphor of the caterpillar transforming into the butterfly as an overlay for a person's transformation when they're going through big transition. So that's another example of metaphors. These different ways that image speaks to us and helps us discern meaning through symbolism gives us the ability to find deeper meaning and purpose in our own lives. And so we want to keep our eyes open when we're doing the dream work for these colloquialisms and these metaphors that are trying to be seen. So how we actually end up determining what the interpretation is through something that Robert Johnson calls it the it clicks method. Really what it is, it's where do you feel the chemistry, the charge? Where does something feel charged? Like you'll be able to really feel it, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It really requires us to sit back and to allow ourselves to soak in the imaginal realm, to soak in wonder and exploration, and then to go back through all those associations we did that and see which ones are the ones that are really standing out, that deserve a little star, and that might start to help us put this map together of what's trying to be communicated through our unconscious. The majority of your associations, as I mentioned, might be thrown out. So don't feel defeated if you do all this work and you're like, oh, 90% of what the work I did didn't even apply, because it did. It's just you needed to go through that 90% to be able to really get to what clicks. You're looking for the one that really clicks. You're looking for the one that you feel that charge with, and then go with that. Sometimes you'll feel the charge, and I even will work with clients. If you're feeling a deep resistance, that's another way to really look at more of like shadow content, the stuff that we really don't want to look at, which absolutely lives in the unconscious, which is part of what we went over last week. So what is dream work required? I mean, I think that it's one of those things where it's kind of like cool, right? Everybody's like, I want to be able to understand my dreams better and stuff. But I want us to really just take a moment to know, like, what are we working with? Bringing it back to that unconscious content and how it can feel really scary, right? Because the way our psyche works is it takes that unconscious content and it puts it into the deeper parts of the unconscious, which is represented in this image by that iceberg, the part of the iceberg that's underneath. So it really requires us to be willing to be courageous, be willing to look at things that might be a little uncomfortable that we don't want to look at, and really show up open and curious, rather than judgmental and critical, open and curious about what is being communicated. It requires us to slow down and to be patient. I have a client that each one of her dreams are so rich and full, it almost feels like we could take a month to process each dream with the amount of images and symbolism that shows up. So, we really have to be patient, especially in her case, and we have to, in her case, almost take a step back and really look at those patterns more and see if we can then come back to the symbols and the images to find that interpretation. We have to approach with care and willingness, like really be respectful to your unconscious and to yourself when you're doing dream work. It's really sacred, that information that's being revealed through the unconscious. It's very personal, it's very sacred, and it's very potently informative. So when you do this work, really show up with that level of respect, that level of care and willingness to do this work. And, in a supportive environment. So making sure that you have what you need. You have a person maybe that you're working with for dream interpretation, or you have an environment that is going to support you to do some of that shadow work, to look at things that maybe, got pushed in that unconscious that didn't want to be looked at for a reason. So I really want to encourage you all to maybe, be in action while we do this series. And I know there's going to be a little space between this session and our next session to give you some time so that you can really work with images. I'd love to encourage each one of you to maybe pick somewhere between 3 to 5 or 7 images. I wouldn't go more than that. And start to do some association work. Maybe get that journal. Maybe just start to, first you want to write the dream in your first person, and then pick out the images that you feel that charge with, and begin to do that association work and let yourself just kind of push through all of that. I always just talk a little bit about how I work when I work with people, because, our container and feeling safe is really, really important, especially when we're doing deep transformative work. So a lot of the content that I work with Access Elite on either is oscillating between yoga practices that can help us create that sense of calm in our nervous system, or getting into the cool imaginal work with depth psychology, where we can do things like active imagination, dream work, and just working more with metaphor, symbol, and image in our lives to deepen our meaning and our purpose. And I will, leave it open now. If anybody has any questions, I can't believe I was able to get it all out in 25 minutes. I was worried about that today.
Lisa, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Such an interesting topic. Well, thank you to everybody for joining us today. As Lisa mentioned, we would love to open up for a Q&A. So if you do have a question, please feel free. You can go ahead and unmute yourself now and ask directly. You're also welcome to type into the chat or to private chat me if you would prefer, and I could ask on your behalf. But I can get us started off. I would love to know if someone has a recurring dream, or maybe a recurring theme, or something that continues to pop up in their dreams, and they do the work, they get to the bottom of it and kind of figure out the meaning and how it relates to their life. what happens to the dream? Does it still keep happening? Does it go away? Does it vary?
So I always think about I'm always working with people on how do we actually digest that content that's in our unconscious, because really it needs to be integrated rather than repressed. So I find that when people are working on a dream or a pattern of something that's going on and they do that inner work, it almost helps them metabolize something, and something begins to shift, and it begins to the best word I can say is integrate. Integrate back into their experience of life, because what's going into our dreams. I'm thinking about a client of mine in particular, Elise, that I was working with, and she was the one with these very vivid, intense dreams. And there was a lot of like gory stuff. It wasn't pretty images, it was like her being afraid and her being chased, and then somebody trying to kill her. And then in another instance, it was her killing off, other people. And so that could sound really disturbing on the surface level. But what's really powerful is as we started to really do that deeper work, and I love Robert Johnson's approach, because what he really, and Jung really says is, look, everything that's showing up in our dreams is an aspect of our inner personality, right? So as she was doing this killing or being killed, there was this transformation she was going through in her own life. And each one of those images that were showing up, that were playing in that war, were representing different aspects of herself. And she was like in that deep integration process, Elise. So it was really just representing things that were falling away, parts and pieces of her that were falling away. And sometimes like the resistance on letting those things die off, the struggle that can come with around that.
So interesting. I love it. So what do you think then we can begin to do to work through the resistance? Like I wonder about, maybe there's something occurring in your dream that you can't quite figure out how it connects. And maybe it's something that you've like buried away in your subconscious, or you don't want to remember from like early childhood, for example. How do you
So
begin
good.
to, I know, sorry, this is probably a long answer too.
Well, I think there's a lot of things like trauma, right? If we have trauma, that could show up in our dreams. Like there's a lot of like really uncomfortable things that can show up. And so what I like about depth psychology is that it brings in play. So we can do things like, one of my favorite things to do with people is active imagination. And you can do this even with your dream figures. There's a book by a gentleman named Steven Eisenstadt. It's called Dream Tending. And what he does is he says basically let your dream figures become like your board of directors. And there's a thing we do in depth psychology called personification. And maybe we'll do some webinars in the future, more diving into this. But it's really powerful when these aspects of us kind of are throwing a tantrum within our world, is the way I like to think about it. And if you think about like, when does a kid throw a tantrum? When they want attention, right? When they want to be seen, when they want to be heard, when they want to be expressed and acknowledged. So I think about our dreams in the same way. And I think about those images and those figures that show up in our dreams. And one of the things I love to do in depth psychology is personification and dialoguing with these images. And it's amazing once they get seen and heard, how they'll just kind of like calm down or dissipate. I mean, some of those things, Elise, and you're right, this is a long answer. They don't just go away because they're a part of our inner personalities. So I have a client right now that her 12-year-old spoiled bratty princess, is what she calls it, just runs havoc in her life and shows up, and it just happens so unconsciously, and it's literally destroyed tons of relationships in her life. And so she through some of these practices, we're helping empower her to reparent this 12-year-old that's within her, so that she can just function in a more responsive way and not what happens is projection. What happens is she'll project onto others her upset. And there's no control when it's happening, right? But when we're able to use these types of practices, we're able to actually get control back. It's so much. I could be here for like hours.
I know, and I feel like I could ask a million questions. So I'm glad that this is a series of classes that we're doing with you, and that we
So
have.
that's a good thing too. Sorry, Elise. When you're working with your dream images, notice if there's characteristics. We're made of multiple parts. We're not one part. And we become fragmented because one part takes over, you know? So when you're working with your dream images, also maybe adding in that layer of like, oh, wow, what part of me is this? And does this part of me rule my life? Where does this part of me show up? Is it a 12-year-old spoiled bratty princess, or an angry 5-year-old boy, you know, or.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah, you got it. So we got 2 weeks, right?
Yes.
Do some of this work.
What did you say? I'm sorry, you cut out.
2 weeks to start doing some of this work and exploring, and then we'll come back and we'll get into step 2, which is being able to create a little more of a personal interpretation.
Absolutely. And we are so looking forward to that. So thank you so much for leading us in this session. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope you all loved it as well. As Lisa mentioned, we do have another session coming up on Tuesday, September 15th. So next week, we are taking a week off with Lisa, and she'll be back the following week. So we look forward to seeing all of you there. And that will be that part 2 that she mentioned. And that, again, this is part of the Dream series that Lisa is doing for us right now. And then we may be going into a sleep series after this. So stay tuned and we'll share a little bit more about that in the future. But for those of you who are Access Elite members, you know how to join in on all of those sessions. You can head over to the Access Elite app, or you can just log in at accesselitenow.com through the member login button. And if you have any questions at all along the way, please feel free to shoot me an email to elise@accesselitenow.com, and I'll be happy to help. I should also mention that Lisa is available for private appointments through the Access Elite app to any of our members. So if you are interested in furthering this conversation, learning a little bit more, doing some private consultations with her, you can schedule an appointment with her through there.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much.
Bring
your stuff so we can all learn together in a couple weeks.
Sounds great. Well, we will see you there. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.